I am one of the 10 spies who did not believe we could conquer the land. And this is my story. My name is Palti, son of Rafu, of the tribe of Benjamin. Before that morning at Kadesh, I was no one of consequence, a leader among my clansmen, yes, but not a man whose name would be remembered. I have wished 1,000 times since that it hadn't been. I remember the dust of the wilderness of Paran clinging to the backs of my hands the day Moses called the 12 of us together. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge, and the camp was still gray with morning shadow, thousands of tents rippling faintly in the cold wind that comes before dawn in that country. I could smell the smoke of banked cooking fires, the sharp tang of livestock, the dust that never truly leaves your nostrils in that land. Moses stood before us, his staff planted in the sand, and his eyes, I still see them, searching each of our faces as if he already knew what he would find in some of them. Go up into the Negev, and then into the hill country, he said. See what the land is, whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land is good or bad, whether the towns are open camps or fortified, whether the land is rich or poor, whether there is timber in it, and be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Be of good courage. I did not know then how those words would haunt me. We were 12, one from each tribe, good men, respected men. Caleb stood near me, solid as a boulder, his jaw already set the way it would stay set for 40 days. Joshua, Moses' own attendant, stood a little apart, quiet, watching everything the way a soldier watches a battlefield before the first arrow flies. I did not know yet that these two would carry something in their hearts that the rest of us lacked, something I would spend years trying to name. We left the camp in silence, 12 men walking north into a land none of us had seen, though we had heard of it our whole lives. It was the land promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, the land flowing with milk and honey, the words every mother in Egypt had whispered to her children through generations of slavery. I had heard those words from my own mother's lips as a boy in the mud brick rooms of Goshen, her voice low so the taskmasters would not hear the hope in it. For 40 days we walked that land. I will never forget it, not because I want to remember, but because it will not leave me. We climbed through the Negev, that dry, tawny expanse where the wind carries grit into every fold of your cloak, and then upward into hill country greener than anything I had known in Egypt. I remember standing on a ridge near Hebron and looking out over terraced hillsides thick with vines, the smell of ripe grapes drifting up from the valley on the evening air, sweeter than anything I had smelled since we left the Nile. I remember thinking, for one unguarded moment, this is it. This is the place our fathers dreamed of. My chest had ached with something like joy. We came to the valley of Eshcol, and there we cut a single cluster of grapes so heavy that Caleb and another man had to carry it slung on a pole between them, its clusters dragging near the ground. I remember the weight of it when I helped lift the pole to my shoulder for a stretch of road. My arm burned within the hour. We gathered pomegranates too, and figs, their skins split with ripeness, juice running sticky over my fingers. I licked it from my thumb and thought, foolishly, that the hardest part of our journey was already behind us. It wasn't the land that broke me. It was the men who lived in it. In Hebron we saw them. I do not know how else to describe what I felt in that moment, except to say that something inside my chest simply dropped, the way a stone drops down a well, and you wait and wait and never quite hear it strike bottom. The descendants of Anak. Giants. I had heard stories of large men before, but nothing prepared me for what I saw with my own eyes. Men so tall that when they walked among their own people, they looked like a grown man walking among children. Their shoulders were wider than the door frames of the houses I remembered in Egypt. Their spears, when I glimpsed them, looked less like weapons and more like the trunks of young trees. I remember standing behind a low stone wall at dusk, my heart hammering so hard I feared they might hear it, watching one of these Anakim stride across a threshing floor, and I felt, for the first time in my life, truly small. Not humble. Small. There is a difference, though I did not understand it then. Humility bows before God. What I felt bowed before flesh. That night, camped in a ravine outside the city, none of us spoke much. I remember Caleb chewing a fig methodically, his eyes fixed somewhere past the fire, and Joshua sharpening nothing in particular with a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape the only sound besides the wind. The other men, my fellow spies from Reuben, Simeon, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Gad, sat with their arms wrapped around their knees like men trying to hold themselves together. "Did you see the size of them?" someone murmured. It wasn't a question. I did not answer. I was too busy doing the arithmetic of fear in my own head, counting their fortified cities against our tents, their spears against our shepherd staffs turned to weapons, their generations rooted in that land against our 40 years wandering as slaves. I was measuring giants against my own reflection, and I already knew who would win that contest. I want to tell you that I fought against the fear. I did not. I fed it. Every mile back toward Kadesh, I rehearsed the report I would give, and with every mile, the report grew darker, because fear left unchallenged does not stay the same size. It grows the way a shadow grows as the sun sinks, slowly, and then all at once, until it swallows everything. We returned to Kadesh on the 40th day. The camp had been waiting, watching for us, and when our dusty figures came over the ridge carrying that impossible cluster of grapes, a cry went up through the tents that spread like fire through dry grass. Moses and Aaron stood before the whole congregation, and I remember the faces pressed close around us. Mothers with infants on their hips, old men leaning on staffs, children who had never known any home but a tent, all of them straining forward to hear what we would say about the land their whole lives had been bent toward. We showed them the fruit first. I heard the gasps, saw hope kindle in 1,000 faces at once, like lamps lit down a long street. For one breath, I let myself feel it too. Then someone, one of my fellow spies, though shame keeps me from remembering whose voice began it, perhaps because in my heart I know it might as well have been my own, said the word that changed everything. But the people who dwell in the land are strong. But the cities are fortified and very large. But we saw the descendants of Anak there. I watched the light go out of those faces the way a wind snuffs a row of lamps down that same long street, one after another, until the whole crowd stood in shadow. And then it was my turn, and the others, to say what we had rehearsed in our hearts on the road, and I said it. May God forgive me, I said it. We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. Caleb tried to quiet the crowd. I remember him climbing onto a rise of rock, his voice cutting through the rising wail of the congregation. "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." But my voice and the voices of the other 9 rose over his like floodwater over a single stone. "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Grasshoppers! I had never even spoken to one of the Anakim. I did not know what I seemed like to them at all. I had simply decided, somewhere on that dusty road home, that I already knew how the story would end, and I told it to an entire nation before God had a chance to write it himself. The camp did not sleep that night. I heard it from inside my own tent. The sound of an entire nation weeping, a sound like the sea at night, formless and enormous and without end. I heard men saying it would have been better to die in Egypt, better to die in this wilderness than to fall by the sword in that land, their wives and children taken as plunder. I heard them plotting to choose a new leader and go back to Egypt, back to slavery, because slavery, with its bread and onions, felt safer than freedom with its giants. I lay in the dark and told myself I had only spoken the truth. I did not yet understand that a report can be entirely factual and still be a lie if it leaves out the one fact that changes everything: that the God who split the sea and rained bread from heaven and led us by fire at night was still walking in the midst of our camp, and he does not measure giants the way frightened men do. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes before the whole assembly. I remember Caleb's voice, raw with a courage I had not earned. "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." The congregation picked up stones. And then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting, before all the people of Israel, and the weeping stopped, as if the sea itself had frozen mid-wave. I will not try to describe what that glory looked like. I do not have the words, and I am not certain a man is meant to survive trying to find them. I only know that every stone dropped from every hand, and the whole camp fell silent before something none of us could argue with, though 10 of us had spent the whole day arguing as if we could outreport the living God. I heard his voice speak to Moses, not with my ears exactly, but in a way that settled into my bones and has never left them. He said the people would wander in this wilderness 40 years, a year for every day we had spied the land, until this whole generation, every man 20 years old and upward who had grumbled against him, fell in the wilderness. Only Caleb and Joshua, of all the spies, would enter the land, because they had followed the Lord fully, and I had not. And then, of the 10 of us who brought that fearful report, a plague came from the Lord, swift and certain, and the men who had said we are not able died before him, not on some far battlefield against a giant spear, but in the very camp we thought we were protecting with our unbelief. I am writing these final words with the plague already moving through my body like fire through dry grass, the same fire that once spread through that camp on the day I opened my mouth. I want you, whoever you are, hearing my story long after my dust has returned to this same wilderness, to understand something before I close my eyes. The giants were real. I did not lie about their size, but I let their size become larger than the God who had already parted a sea for me. I stood in the shadow of Anak and forgot I had walked through the Red Sea on dry ground. I tasted grapes grown in the land God promised me, and I still told myself the promise was a lie. I talked myself into defeat before a single arrow had been loosed, before a single sword had been drawn, and I took a whole generation down into the wilderness with the words of my own mouth. Do not do what I did. When you stand before your own Anakim, whatever giant looms over your life, whatever impossible thing casts its shadow over your promised land, do not measure it against your own strength. I measured Canaan's giants against 10 frightened spies, when I should have measured them against the God who split the sea. Caleb and Joshua saw the same giants I saw. They walked the same land, ate the same grapes, felt the same dust on their feet. The difference was never in what we saw. It was in what we told ourselves about what we saw. Grasshoppers is what I called us, but I was never asked to fight in my own strength. None of us were. I simply forgot to ask the only question that mattered. Not are they bigger than me, but is my God bigger than them? Don't talk yourself into defeat before the battle has even begun. The report you speak over your own life will either fall like stones on the necks of your neighbors, or it will call a nation forward into the land God already promised them. Choose your words the way Caleb chose his, with your eyes on the size of your God, not the size of your fear.